team at Douglas Elliman Real Estate. And today I'm joined by my teammates and fellow panelists, Janet Temadayo, Nadia Hussey, Susie Gordino, Charlie Webb, and Ellis Bachman. Our fearless leader, John Gomes, was unable to be with us today. John recently lost the love of his life, and on behalf of the panel and our entire team, we want to just take a moment to honor Raul's memory and let John know that we love and care about him and are thinking of him. So before we dive in, I just want to quickly recap and lay out the next 6 weeks of the series. Last week, we discussed a historical timeline of Africans in America from 1619 through the abolition of chattel slavery in 1863. Today, we're picking things up in the late 19th century, and we'll cover Jim Crow through the Civil Rights era to today and George Floyd. On next week's roundtable, we'll be discussing the human stories of living while Black in America, followed by racism in real estate on August 5th. On August 12th, the panel will discuss where do we go from here, followed by how to implement change on the 19th. On August 26th, we'll hold a rally prep Zoom call in anticipation of August 28th's March on Washington. Next slide, please. We'd be remiss if we didn't start today's roundtable by paying tribute to the loss of two giants, Representative John Lewis of Georgia and Reverend C.T. Vivian, a man who Dr. King described as the best preacher to ever live. Both of these men were freedom fighters and were arrested on the same day in 1961 fighting for desegregation and died on the same day in 2020, this past weekend. All right, so let's get started. We're looking forward to a lot of audience participation today, so please send the moderator your questions, thoughts, or comments via the chat. And once we wrap up the discussion, we'll toss it to the audience, and at which point you can hit the raise your hand button, and we'll go from there. And I just want to remind everyone before we get started that we understand that a lot of these conversations can be really uncomfortable, and we just want to assure everybody that this is a judgment-free zone. And from that, we will get started. So today we're going to start at 1866 with the creation of the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan started in Pulaski, Tennessee, and moved to Stone Mountain, Georgia. This was a point in time where lynching, fear, and murder became normalized and became, in fact, encouraged in the South. Black codes were legalized by Southern states to keep newly freed Black Americans working for low wages or in debt. It restricted Blacks from owning property, conducting business, buying or leasing land, which essentially stopped any chance at the earning of wealth or attainment of wealth. At the same time, there was a loophole in the 13th Amendment, which created the convict leasing system, which essentially said that one could be essentially re-enslaved if they were criminally punished, which encouraged the arrest of Black men for essentially anything. At this time, over 90% of the Southern prison population was Black, which will be relevant 105 years later.
Then we go to 1868, the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed all citizens equal protection of the laws. This essentially overturned the Dred Scott decision, which, as we can remember, showed that no person of African descent can claim citizenship in America. So 3 years after this reform, John Willis Menard becomes the first Black elected to Congress in Louisiana. In 1869, Howard University School of Law becomes the first Black law school. First Black Labor Convention meets in DC, and Menard becomes the first Black person to give a speech to Congress. In 1870, the 15th Amendment. The right of citizens of the US to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race. And noticing Black political potential, voter suppression now is increased. Oh, Janet, you're muted.
Janet?
So sorry. I apologize for that, guys. Wait, hold on a second.
We can hear
You
you.
hear me? Okay, awesome. All right. So 1875 Civil Rights Act, which affirmed the equality of all men before the law and prohibited racial discrimination in public places, is overturned by 8-1 Supreme Court vote as unconstitutional, which we'll see the importance of this in 90 years. 1881, Spelman College becomes the first Black women's college. And, if it's a historically Black college and university. And, I went to one. I went to Morgan State University, shout out to my alma mater. But so, they pride themselves in, intellectual, creative upbringing of, the women that go to Spelman. The African Dodger, AKA, and if Ellis can please put that slide up. I don't necessarily feel comfortable just saying the word to the group, but you guys get the point via the slide. This is introduced as carnivals, it's introduced at carnivals and fairs, and white customers throw baseballs at Black Lives. We can go to the next point. Who's on? No, I'm done.
Oh, you are?
All right. 29, that's you, Stephen.
Okay, so let's go.
You're muted, Stephen.
Stephen?
All right. So guys, in 1890, states legalized essentially discrimination on voting. Now you must, at this point, own property and be able to read in order to vote. But owning land and reading is illegal. This will be relevant in 75 years and to a certain degree still today. 6 years later, the Supreme Court affirms that Blacks are separate but equal in the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. At the same time was the first great migration of Black refugees from the South to North, essentially looking for better opportunity. This was also the same era where sundown towns started, which essentially said that if you were Black, you had to be out of the town by the end of the day. Otherwise, you would be subject to harassment or worse from law enforcement.
And now I'm going to go over to the year 1905, where James Weldon Johnson wrote the official Negro national hymn, Lift Every Voice and Sing. This song was birthed because whoever was here last week, we went over how the first national hymn wasn't necessarily reflecting our journey as Black people. Also in that year, O.W. Gurley buys a large area of land in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And this land is going to be the place where Black Wall Street takes place. I know that a lot of people have been hearing about Black Wall Street, so I'm going to drop a link for you guys to reference on the side because we're not going to dive too far into it today. So let me move on. Then in 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, is founded by W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Mary White Covington, and Morfield Story. Then with 1917 to 1919, this is the year that the first film was ever shown at the White House. And this first film was a very controversial Birth of a Nation. Another nickname of the film is called The Klansman. So to have this be the first filming shown at the White House just shows kind of where the country was historically with race. Also, racially restrictive covenants, which expand property owners' bans to the house sales to Blacks. We're gonna touch in on that once we get to our segment on racism in real estate.
So the 1920s, which is the Harlem Renaissance era, pushes Black culture. Black Wall Street is bombed and burned in 1921. 76,000 women of color are sterilized in North Carolina from 1929 to 1974. Great Depression strikes in 1929. And it's important to just note that the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, happens later on, which we'll kind of touch on a little bit. And it was also known as the Hart-Celler Act. And it abolished an earlier quota system and changed the demographic of, the makeup of the American population. 1931 to 1935, the national anthem and Star Spangled Banner, officially America's song, Tuskegee syphilis experiments. So these are all things that are happening during this time. 399 Blacks observed for 40 years and never told that they had syphilis or given a cure. Things they do to you when you're not considered human is very prevalent during this time. Federal Housing Administration is created. Redlining and housing discrimination legally begins in 200+ cities. First Republic housing projects, Techwood Homes, opened in Atlanta, Georgia in 1935, and this is relevant, later on in 88 years. 2 years later, Victor H. Green creates the Negro Motorist Green Book for Blacks to avoid racist areas.
And that takes us to 1939 to 1945, where the US entered World War II. Over 1 million Black people were drafted and fighting for freedom, but essentially came home to denial of taking advantage of the fruits of their labor in the form of the GI Bill, no bank loans, no VA housing privileges, the Veterans Administration. 99% of those benefits, which built wealth in the 20th century, went to white soldiers, which started white flight, which we'll get to in the creation of the suburbs. And this perpetuates the denial of building wealth in the country for Black people. In the 1950s, poor Blacks with no homes are working good factory jobs as a consequence of the Great Migration and essentially abandoning the South for northern cities and eventually the West Coast. This will come up 20 years later when we face a bit of an economic downturn. At this point, the government encourages the white majority of the country in form of subsidies to developers and many other things, which we'll touch on during racism in real estate, outside of the big cities. So this is when the post-war baby boom and the suburbs were created. Going to 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, which essentially banned segregation in schools, is finally considered unconstitutional, but this kind of changes, which we'll touch on in 36 years.
And Alice, if you can put up that Emmett Till picture. We go to 1955, where Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy, was brutally murdered by 2 white men for supposedly speaking inappropriately to a 21-year-old white woman in a grocery store, who she later said she falsified that account. These 2 white men went to his house, kidnapped him, brutally beat him, shot him in the head, and then drowned his body in the Tallahatchie River. When they found his body 3 days later, it looked like on the right. His mother requested an open casket so everyone could see exactly what they had done to her son. The 2 white men boasted about the murder publicly and then was acquitted by an all-white jury. This is essentially the beginning of the civil rights protest beginning. This is relevant to why every single protest happens. If there is no justice, there can be no peace. Subsequently as well, the Vietnam War starts, and over 225,000 Black men went back to war to fight for America. In 1956, Rosa Parks is arrested and for not sitting in the back of the bus and not giving up her seat to a white woman in the front of the bus. This started the Montgomery bus boycott. Then J. Edgar Hoover creates the secret counterintelligence program COINTELPRO to maintain the U.S. status quo of whiteness in America and to kill, silence, or destroy any and all protest movements and Black messiahs. See the assassination of MLK and Malcolm X, which we'll touch on this later.
1960, you have the Greensboro Forum, which is the Greensboro sit-downs. It consists of 4 young Black students. And it's basically peaceful protests at the Woolworth. The protest works. Months later, they can eat at the counter. Police militarization increases due to racial protests. Riot and SWAT teams created as a result. You know, peaceful protests were something that were done, and these 4 gentlemen, Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, Azael Blair Jr., and David Richmond, really were, you know, they were very prominent in this time in getting these peaceful protests done.
And in 1963, President JFK and civil rights activist Medgar Evers assassinated. Also, Dr. Martin Luther King has a dream. Just 1 month before, 4 young Black girls are bombed and killed while getting dressed at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Now, 2 out of the 5 white men involved were convicted 38 years later in 2001. Yes, 38 years later. Then in 1994, just 1 year later, Fannie Lou Hamer gives one of the greatest speeches ever. LBJ signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which reverses 1875 Supreme Court decision and prohibits discrimination of all kinds. Meanwhile, civil rights activists James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman are killed by the police and the KKK. That's known as the Mississippi Burning. And this is also the year where I think that, you know, we hear this story all the time when a hotel manager poured hydrochloric acid in a pool in Florida because Black people were swimming in it.
Okay, and that takes us to 1965, when Malcolm X is assassinated at a ballroom in New York City. Same year, Martin Luther King marches 54 miles from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery. This is also the same year that Lyndon Baines Johnson signs the second act, otherwise known as the 1965 Voting Rights Act, so that Black people are allowed to vote. So this is really the first year where Blacks are fully recognized as human and citizens. Prior to that, there was really some thing on the books that was always kind of holding it back. What's also interesting about this year is, if we could put it on mute so I can hear a little bit of feedback. What's also interesting about this year is that it was also the year that the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act was passed. This was the first time in American history that there were no longer any ethnic or national quotas on who could immigrate to the United States of America, which essentially has paved the way for the multiracial, diverse coalition that we see in America today. The America today, prior to that 1965 Civil Rights Immigration Act, did not look like it does today. And quite frankly, we know that that act was passed on the backs of those who marched and bled for civil rights. In 1966, the Black Panther Party was founded in Oakland, California, against police brutality and violence. Because the Panthers are armed, the governor of California passed the Mulford Act, which essentially outlawed the public carrying of firearms. And this is also the same year that the Supreme Court introduced qualified immunity in order to protect law enforcement from lawsuits or liability when something happens. This will be very relevant for the next 53 years, which we will touch on as we go on in the timeline.
Okay, here I am. Now we're getting to 1968, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. 200 cities riot and protest for 53 days. I think you guys could see we're kind of in line with that change that was with our riots and our protests continuing now. The FBI documents were classified until 2027. Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised a black fist at the Mexico Summer Olympics. We're going to touch on it when we
get
bring
that slide, Alice, please.
Yeah. And again, LBJ signs the Fair Housing Act, prohibiting housing discrimination. So now, here we are in 1968, after 349 years, Blacks can finally vote. We can finally buy a house and be a citizen with protection. And this was only 52 years ago. Just want to point that out. So now let me go to 1969 to get us, I want to get to the discussion as soon as we can. Richie Havens opens Woodstock with Freedom, and then Jimi Hendrix closes it. So Woodstock had 2 Black artists begin and end the first year in New York. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the Black Panther deputy, Fred Hampton, is assassinated by Chicago police. And I mentioned that because I think Charlie earlier she spoke on the CONTEL program that was created to kill and silence all Black protesters. So I just wanted to tie everything together. Thank you.
Right. So 1970s, you have technology, globalization, and outsourcing increasing Black unemployment by 20%. So low education, no job opportunity, poor public housing environment leaves the door open for crime and for drugs. Shirley Chisholm becomes the first woman and the first Black woman to run for the Democratic presidential nomination. It's the rise of the Black Power movement in America. In 1971, the Congressional Black Caucus was established in DC to advocate on behalf of Black people. The Nixon administration starts the war on drugs, and this begins throughout the next 40 years. So police presence in inner cities increased significantly. Arrest rates rise, targeting Black men. Mass incarceration begins again. Go back to convict leasing. That's the 13th Amendment. If you want to learn more about that, you can watch the 13th. Stephen mentioned that in 1866, our first comment. And Hoover's COINTELPRO ends then as well. 2 years later, Martin Cooper invents the mobile cell phone. Just thought you might want to know that, 1971. So that's very relevant later.
1978, the Supreme Court rules in Regents versus Bake that affirmative action and race can be used as a legal strategy to deal with past discrimination. 1980s, the war on drugs continues. Drug arrests up to 126%, harsh mandatory minimum sentencing. There's still heavy policing presence. Corrections Corporations of America is founded, and prisoners become Wall Street stock. Pardon? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. The Black Panther Party ends due to early COINTELPRO involvement. 34 million Americans living below poverty line, 36% are Black. And moving on, so Jesse Jackson runs for Democratic nomination in 1984, finishing 3rd.
And then in 1985, crack cocaine really begins destroying inner cities. And there's a lot of documentaries that reveal that the FBI, CIA, and US State Department was involved with Nicaraguan rebels, which indirectly allowed drug trafficking into the US. Inner city. Charlie? Charlie? Okay, Charlie is having.
I'm sorry, I think I'm getting a little feedback. So in 1989, Jesse Jackson runs again in 1988, finishing second. The Bush administration wins, but Willie Horton instills more fear about Black men. Bush continues the war on drugs, and Congress passes the 100-to-1 sentencing disparity for crack rock against powdered cocaine. Now, whites used more expensive cocaine powder, while Blacks were using more crack rock. So this calls for a $1.5 billion drug war. This is relevant 24 years later and millions of prisoners later.
Okay, so that takes us to 1992 with the continuation on the war on drugs, the continued militarization and mass incarceration, which at this point sees over 2 million Black citizens in prison. This is also the year that Rodney King's assailants were acquitted, which saw some of the worst rebellion and uprising in the history of Los Angeles. The National Guard was sent in to quell tensions. 2 years later, the Three Strikes Law and the infamous 1994 crime bill were signed, which saw a significant increase in mass incarceration. And 5 years later, the 1033 program transferred $5.1 billion of military weapons to our law enforcement, local law enforcement.
Janet, you're muted.
Sorry, I gotta get used to that. 2005, Hurricane Katrina is the worst urban disaster in modern history. 90,000 Blacks are displaced, disproportionately affecting Black communities. Black homeowners are three times more likely to be affected than white. Redlining and housing discrimination ensured white families had first claim to higher ground and land and homes. And if you take a look at, Ellis, if you can put up that the next slide, I just want everybody to just pay attention to this slide right over here. And it kind of just gives you an idea of pretty much, you know, how Black people were viewed during the time of Hurricane Katrina. If you look at some of the notes, or I should say commentary that's right in here, I'll leave you to kind of like just view that yourself, but it just gives you a visualization of how Black people were viewed during the time of Hurricane Katrina, although going through the same thing as white people.
Thank you, Janet. And we have in 2008, that's when our first Black president got elected in this country. In 2009, the schools were still underfunded in the cities. We were facing a lot of foreclosures, and there was still predatory lending against Blacks, Asians, and Hispanics, all during a global recession. Oscar Grant was killed on New Year's, and the cop served less than 1 year. That's okay. Stephen, I'll go over to you.
Okay, thank you, Nadia. Okay, so at this point, as we really get to the present, unemployment is still on the rise. This is essentially, now we're in recent times with respect to the Great Recession. And the Black population in America is 13%, or 40 million people. This is at the same time where in 2016, Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem, which he actually did after speaking with Army Green Beret Nate Boyer to learn what kneeling represented at military funerals. And he wanted to make clear that it was not meant to be a disrespectful thing to veterans, military, or police. And it was essentially, given all the history we've outlined for you, it was a protest of 346 years of injustice in America that was still kind of persisting. And before we go into the audience, we're just going to go over a couple of those cases with our panelists.
So 2012 to 2016, the Black Lives Matter movement, is created during this time. So to kind of start off, just so everyone knows, Black Lives Matter movement started with the killing of Trayvon Martin and the acquittal of George Zimmerman. Trayvon Martin was killed on February 26, 2012. And next comes, I'll kick it off to Charlie to continue on.
Eric Garner, July 17th, 2014, I can't breathe. He said that 11 times when they put him in a deadly chokehold for supposedly selling Lucy's in the street. He dies.
Tamir Rice, November 22nd, 2014, excuse me. Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old boy that was shot by police after essentially playing with a toy gun. He was killed almost immediately without any, questioning information. The cops pretty much saw the toy gun and identified him as a threat, a 12-year-old boy. Next, we go on to, oh wait, Charlie, I think you're next.
No, you're.
Oh,
we're going to Sandra Bland next.
July 13th, 2015, Sandra Bland, 28 years old, is found hanging in the jail cell in Texas. 3 days after a routine traffic stop that was performed. Police officials claimed that this was a suicide attempt.
Then we have Elijah McClain. He was stopped from walking home. He went to go get an iced tea for his brother. Elijah McClain happened August 24th, 2019. He was 140 pounds, 5'7", massage therapist. He's put into a chokehold, pinned to the ground. And during this time, I just want to read to you, they have the audio of what he said. I can't breathe. I have my idea right here. My name is Elijah McClain. That's my house. I was just going home. I'm an introvert. I'm just different. That's all. I'm so sorry. I have no gun. I don't do that stuff. I don't do any fighting. Why are you attacking me? I don't even kill flies. I don't eat meat. I don't judge people. I don't judge people who eat meat. Forgive me. All I was trying to do was become better. I will do it. I will do anything. Sacrifice my identity. I'll do it. You all are phenomenal. You all are beautiful. I love you. Try to forgive me. I'm a mood Gemini. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ow, that really hurt. You are all very strong. Teamwork makes the dream work. Crying. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to do that. I just can't breathe correctly. Proceeds to vomit from the pressure in his chest and neck. I'm sorry. Get emotional on this one. They then proceed, once he passes out, to inject him with 500 milligrams of ketamine, which is double the amount that you need for someone of 140 pounds. He has 2 heart attacks on the way to the hospital and is pronounced dead 2 days later. Then you have Ahmaud Arbery on February 23rd, 2020, victim also to a vigilante killing, much like Trayvon Martin. He was running in his own neighborhood in Georgia. 2 men cornered him because they thought that he looked like a suspect in the neighborhood that was accused of a robbery. When he wouldn't submit to their pleas of stopping, they shot him with a shotgun. A 3rd man who had this all on video so that he could show their community text message thread what they had done. By the way, it took over 74 days after that killing to get an arrest of these 3 men.
Brianna Taylor, March 13, 2020. Brianna Taylor was a first responder, EMT, who was in her home at the time when police officials basically stormed in and shot and killed her. I believe the amount of bullets that they found in her were 8. At the time, the police were responding to a suspect that they actually already had in custody. So there was really no warrant or need for them to be in Brianna Taylor's home. And we're still to this day fighting for justice, for Brianna Taylor.
And lastly, we'll get to George Floyd, which I know you're all very familiar with. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Arrested for allegedly passing a counterfeit bill in Minneapolis. He was put in handcuffs, placed into a chokehold, and Officer Derek Chauvin put his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds while he cried out for his mother and stated he couldn't breathe multiple times. And here we are today.
So guys, I want to thank you all for that.
I'd like to open it up to
turn it over.
discussion now. I think.
I want to thank you for that. Guys, if you'd like to speak, please either type your message into the chat box or raise your hand and the moderator will unmute you. And while you guys are kind of coming up with your questions, I'm gonna kind of spit out some rapid fire stats with respect to kind of what we've been seeing and what's been going on in our country as of late. So after George Floyd's killing, and I think with that paired with Brianna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery happening in such a rapid, back-to-back fashion, you've had some of the largest, most sustained statistically protests in the history of the Republic. We're talking about 54 days of sustained protest. The reality is the media has stopped covering a lot of it, but you are seeing marches still going on in many major and small cities across our country. The uprising and the rebellion has led to discussions regarding police reform, qualified immunity, the removal of Confederate statues, Juneteenth being recognized as a paid holiday at certain private companies, an increase in filming of so-called Karen, Ken, and Amy phenomenon sightings, yellow street art, a boom in Black-owned business, Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben and their historical connotations being removed from the face of some of our products that we see in our stores. The Confederate flag being banned from NASCAR races. So I guess the question is, since we started this in 1619, a lot has changed. And I want to pose a question to you, the panelists and the audience. A lot has changed, but has anything really changed? And I'll let you guys, I'll take it from there.
I mean, I think the reality is that we're, I think, and you guys can agree or disagree with me, we're in a different time right now where we're kind of seeing a repeat in history, right? With the protests, peaceful protesting and people really shining a light in this movement. But I think that the amount or the increase in allies has been very beneficial for the Black community, because we as Black people, right? Like me, Stephen, Nadia, we can protest all day, every day. We've been doing it. However, when we have, our friends like Susie, like Ellis and others kind of standing with us and really pushing it forward, I think it makes a big difference. And we're seeing a change in that. So the only thing we can do is hope for more of a change and it to actually stick.
Thank you for that, Janet. And I just want to read, I'm kind of looking at the comments here. And I just want to read a quick quote from Barbara. Thank you for providing this, Barbara. Her opinion is that not nearly enough in response to my question. No sustainable change. Let's see if this time is different. In many respects, it does feel different, but I think ultimately the question will be, do the politicians have the political will? Does the population at large, are they either behind it or are they not? And I think these are questions that we're going to have to grapple with in the coming days, months and weeks. And this on top of a pandemic, I think has unfortunately laid bare some of the discrepancies in our country, particularly with healthcare, persons of color and the way they're treated in healthcare. And I just think it opens up a lot of hurt and a lot of pain for a lot of people in many respects, generationally. So I think that when we address that, then we can have an open and honest conversation in terms of how we change.
I think, you know, that number that Nadia gave earlier, you know, it's only been 55 years. That's so mind-boggling to think of. And, you know, when you think of the systemic problem, we have 400 years to make up for. So it feels like things have shifted, but in a way where it's, we must face it, but it almost feels like, you know, the politicians and society has made it so that they act like they're trying to fix the problem, but it's like a Band-Aid. So, you know, we talked as a panelist group about this offline last week. You know, everyone's painting Black Lives Matter on the streets, and we're doing things that are definitely positive, but is it a Band-Aid, or are we really getting to the root of the problem here? And what can we do, and what can we continue to do to address the root of the problem? But I do think with social media, you know, thank God, it can't be ignored anymore. You know, people can't just pretend that they don't know what's going on or they don't see what's going on. Now there's no excuse.
To Susie's point, you know, and I've had conversations with people about this, about, you know, does it make a difference when it comes to, and not to really get political, but when it comes to putting, you know, people of color, Black people in a higher position, right? Like, I kind of want to get everybody's thoughts on that, because I've had conversations with this, and I strongly believe that it does, because I think it makes a difference, you know, to even vote. And I think that you know, a lot of us don't do that, right? So, you know, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think, you know, what I'll notice is that there's a shift in just the, you know, there's a song saying the children are the future, but not trying not to sound corny, they really are. I've noticed that, you know, in the teen magazines, when I was a teenager, my magazines never spoke about the importance of voting or the histories where I didn't come out as an 18-year-old once I was a registered voter. I just jumped into, you know, doing whatever my parents did. And I'm seeing a shift, not only with just I think a lot of things that we're seeing right now is performance, right? Like the murals. We never asked for murals, but it's good to see. It boosts morale. Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's. All of these things are showing that people are trying to change the way they think. And the reason why I brought up like the teen magazines is I saw like lately Teen Vogue has been giving these teenagers a lot of riveting content that, I mean, I was finding interesting. So I do think that it's a change. I just hope that it's more of a change than performance. Because right now we could say it until, you know, we're blue, but I think the purpose of us doing this panel is because we know the need of allies. We need allies that are just not, that don't all look like us. We need more people like Susie. We need more people like Ellis. We need to have this like unit. We all need to be a unified front because it's humanity. It's not politics. It's just humanity. It's we're brothers and sisters in more than, you know, one way.
Yeah, I hear that, Nadia. And I guess while you were speaking, I was kind of thinking, just because obviously for a lot of people, and let me just insert a reminder, if any of the attendees would like to speak, please hit the raise your hand button, because we would love to hear from you, whether, no matter what your thought, opinion, or question is. The reality is we need to have an open dialogue about this. And, you know, this is a no judgment zone. So we're not, you know, looking at anyone in any type of way when you do, or if you decide to speak. I guess one of the things that I think is there's so much, it sounds cliche, but division in the country right now, to where if you say Black Lives Matter, that somehow you're against law enforcement or policing, or if you somehow, quote unquote, are on the other side, that you're somehow against Black people. And I think that unfortunately stymies the conversation. I think what this is not per se Black versus white, but it really, what it should be is everybody versus racism. And that's kind of the lens that I try to look through this, because the reality is nothing in a democratic republic is done without a majority, right? So that's not meant to be a political statement, but that's kind of just the what's so about what we're talking about. And, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with people who think that their humanity and their rights are the only ones that are up for debate. Unfortunately, to a certain degree, that's been our history. But you know, as they say, justice never goes in a straight line. There's always going to be setbacks, and this, that, and the other. And I guess we have a panelist guest who would like to speak.
Even we'll hop over to Terrence. Terrence, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, everybody. How
What's
are you?
going on,
Hi.
Terrence?
Hey, Nadia. How's everything? So I've been doing a lot of. First of all, thank you guys for putting this all together. I think this is really great. I forgot who spoke about a lot of the leadership positions that I feel like we need to have. You guys don't see me, right? It's just voice.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, so we spoke about that. I'm in agreement with that. So I've been a strong advocate for trying to combat a lot of systemic racism within the real estate industry. So I've been blatantly addressing it with certain firms and certain organizations about it, because I feel like people get nervous to talk about these things and get uncomfortable. So I feel like the everybody that's fighting and doing the protesting, I want to see a little more than that, because that's all good. But if you're just protesting when it's time to protest, but then when you get back to your regular life, it's still the same thing. I mean, it's like, what are you really doing? So I'm more along the lines of, what can we all piece together to help people take certain initiatives beyond just the protest? Like, what's the actions that you're going to do? So I've been really pushing for that. And I actually had a situation with NIRAC where I was approached to be part of a coalition. And I actually said, that's not good enough. I need to be on the board of directors. And now I was voted on the board of directors of NIRAC because of that. So I'm talking about taking stances like that. This is something I've been pushing really heavy. So that's why I love what you guys are doing. I think this is really great. And that's another aspect which you guys hit the nail on the head, the educational side of it. People don't know. Like, I had one of my managers, he came up to me, I'm African-American, by the way. And the manager said, I never knew how hard it was for you to become so successful in real estate. Like, it's not on people's radar. So that's why I like what you guys are doing with the educational standpoint of it, because it's not on people's radar because it's not part of their life.
Right.
Terrence, I want you to also, two things. I want you to promise that you join us again when we're doing our racism in real estate, because I believe that your wealth of knowledge will be well received. And if you want to talk to me or any of the other panelists, we want to know more.
I'm in. I'm in. Like, I've been pushing heavy, and I've been having to go head to head with people. But me, I'm not the rah-rah person. I'm more like just straight state the facts. So I have to go head to head with people just to really help them get a clearer understanding of what we need. And what I noticed, which you guys probably know, so I apologize too. I love this when I saw you first put it together, but my schedule, I couldn't get to connect. So I was like, today I was actually about to do something, and I said, oh man, it's 2:40. I got to catch it. So I made sure I caught it today. But forgive me if I'm repeating things you guys already touched on. I'm noticing, like, I'm having talks with a lot of high level people within firms and organizations, and I'm getting traction. And then I'm also getting the people that listen and they feel like it's okay just because they listened. Like, but my whole thing is, okay, you heard me, so okay, what's the next step? And I'm the type of person where I'm following through with that. Like, I'm not gonna bite my tongue, and like I said, I'm not gonna be disrespectful to anybody, but hey, if we're having this discussion, we're having this discussion so we can have some sort of steps towards a resolution. So
I love that, Terrence. I think it's all about the follow through and holding people accountable. So
yeah.
I echo what Nadia said. Like, I would love to hear kind of your strategy on how you are holding people accountable, because I think we could all use a little more of that.
Yeah, people try to, like I said, they listen. They listen really well. But like I said, there has to be more. And I also want to applaud NIRAC because they stepped up.
Yeah.
Like when I addressed it and they said, okay, we're going to have a board meeting. And within, 6 hours, they said you were unanimously voted to be on the board of directors. So there's certain people that are really, really stepping up, and they're also doing great initiatives to help us. Like, they really, and I'm not just saying this, but I'm seeing what we're piecing together, and I'm seeing how they're doing it from the heart. So I think that's good. So, and then there's other people we'll talk about that maybe off the record, where like a little wall to break through, but.
Definitely gonna need to connect with you offline, Terrence. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. We really
Thank
appreciate
you guys. I love you guys for doing this, man. This is great.
it. Alrighty.
All right.
Thank you, Terrence. Next, we'll hop over to Heather Roy. Heather, are you there?
Hey.
Hi.
Hey, Heather.
Hey, I'm from Douglas Elliman, Beverly Hills office. Heather and Lyric has Heather. Lyric and I love that y'all are doing this. It's like every time we just text back and forth like, oh my God, I didn't know that. Oh my God, I didn't know that. And we're Googling stuff. So thank you so much. I think I'm bringing us a little bit backwards, because when I raised my hand, it was when somebody was saying like being in positions of leadership. And I do neighborhood council, which is like under city council, but I also do just homeowners association work in my neighborhood, which I know a lot of us in real estate do. And I think it's good to just remember and try to like push that, like, we have a lot of influence in those hyper local ways. Like when people start talking about what's going on in the neighborhood, when there are protests at Crescent Heights and Sunset, like if you're in those neighborhood groups, you have a lot of influence to say like, let's not get hysterical, or let's remember people have rights to protest. And like, so I think, you know, it's hard to just all of a sudden be like, I'm going to be a senator and try to fix something. But like, we all already are really involved in those type of groups, and that might be an easy access point. And I mean, it's been shocking me how much pushback there was in neighborhood council just about the, when we were deciding whether or not to support the cuts to the police budget. Like, I mean, I was shocked, like all the people that were so scared. And so anything you can do to get in there and just bring a different point of view in those hyper local ways, I think it's good. And a lot of us in real estate have better access to that.
Yeah, Heather, I think that's great that you're doing that, because I think, you know, starting off locally is the right start, right? Like it actually makes a difference. You might not see it today, you might not see it tomorrow, but eventually you'll see the changes in, you know, these different neighborhoods that you're kind of counseling in, and people need that, you know, especially Black people. They need that because a lot of Black people don't know what they can afford or what they can, you know, do with their money as far as real estate is concerned. So, you know, we kind of don't have access to that information as easily. So, you know, kudos to you for that.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah, thanks again, guys.
So much.
I miss
Thanks,
seeing
Heather.
you later, Heather. we will meet again.
Yeah.
No, but I really appreciate, we all really appreciate you speaking up and kind of voicing your thoughts. You know, I know
we love that you guys are making a conversation out of this, because it's not the easiest thing to do, and it's the more we do it, the more comfortable we all get, right?
If I'm being frank, I was
Totally.
putting my professional name on this at first, if I can just be candid, especially being a Black agent in two of the biggest markets in the country. But ultimately, you know, I don't have all the answers, but if I can be the face of creating a dialogue, which I think we'll definitely do over these next 6 weeks, and that's what we want to do.
Well, thank you so much.
Next, we'll hop over to Dion. Are you there?
Hey, Dion.
Dion? She on mute?
No, I don't think so. Oh, now she, okay, she's coming out. Dion, you're on mute.
Is she?
You just took it off. Dion, can you hear us? Oh, problem with the mic. Give her a second.
Well, she's on mute. It's showing that she's on mute.
Oh, Dion, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Looks like
Okay. Nope. Maybe
let's hop over to Victoria. Victoria, can you hear us? Are you there?
Hi, it's Dion speaking from Victoria. It's my
Oh.
Hi, you're both together.
Hi. Yeah, so we just want to thank you guys. You know, this is incredibly important, and you guys are so courageous to, you know, just put yourself out there with your views. You know, I'm so disappointed in the real estate industry, and, you know, just because we're calling names, and, you know, we did talk about NIRAC. Why do they wait so long? Like, you know, like, leadership is coming out and just doing the right thing. I was so disappointed in some agencies. I'm gonna call the names. Redney, where was the big statement? You know, I follow them on social media, nothing to say like, okay, you know, like, no, nothing, no black square, no, you know, I'm standing with our agents in, you know, this time. I was close, especially going to their pages of NIRAC and of Rebney, and nothing. So that's not leadership to me. So something definitely, you know, is wrong. And I hope Terrence, you know, being on that board can make some difference in that way. But we need leadership. And I'm gonna just go back to how this team, Eklund Gomes, how they phrased it. This is a humanity crisis. And when I saw that, you know, it was just so emotional for me to see that that you guys just understood what it was, that this is about humanity. And I want to share this, something that I've learned, especially over the last couple of weeks, is that people are not racist, is what I'm learning. That people have racist thoughts and racist feelings and these discriminatory emotions that they were taught were necessary for them to survive. And then they automatically just jump and rely on these prejudice and discriminatory notions in order for them to feel safe, because that's the world that we are growing up in. That, you know, we were born into this, you know, system of white supremacy. And sadly, my beautiful white friends, you know, have to experience these racist thoughts and feelings and emotions that they don't even understand. And we really need to come back to humanity. And I'm just so happy, you know, to have the opportunity to talk and to just bring that back into the conversation, because I think it's important not to lose that piece. Sure, we need laws, we need officials taking action, we need da-da-da-da-da. But in our day-to-day lives and activities, when you see racism playing out, and when we interact, you know, for people, Black people and people of color, interact with other people in situations and in systems that are just set up this way because there is no other way. It's just white supremacy. That's the operating system. To go to the humanity of the person that you're dealing with, or the person in charge, and speak to that. And unfortunately, it's just become an us against them. We Black people and I think really to get to the next level that is demanding and calling for, because we've done this us against them. We know it's humanity, and like, let's continue to appeal to the humanity in these people and these organizations, because humans are the ones running them. And for me, it's always helpful to go back and remind myself, like, they're not racist. they're just taught this and they want to feel safe. And they feel like they've been taught that in order for them to feel safe, sadly, they need to treat Black people this way, because Black people and people of color are a threat to everything that they know, have, and own. And that's sad. And, you know, arguing or calling you a racist or being so upset, it serves a really important function. We should feel angry, but let's turn that anger so that it's love and compassion, and let's get to the root of this problem. And I'm so happy that it was bold letters on your advertisement for this series, that this is a humanity crisis. And I feel so lucky that you guys are in real estate and that you're talking about this in a real estate setting, because, you know, we know that it's a necessary conversation, and that is such amazing leadership in the industry. And so I'm happy to know Victoria and all of you, and to see you guys taking this step.
So much. Thank you so much, Dion. Thank you.
Dion, we really want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Dion.
Okay, so it is 3:32. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it today, but before we do, I want to very quickly tease next week's roundtable, which will be Living While Black, the experiences. So please be sure to tune in next week, same time, same place.
Discussion. Full-on discussion. So,
Right. We've gone through the history. Now we're going to tell you
It's gonna be all participation, and we all have our stories to share. So it's gonna start getting fun right now.
And we're going to want to hear from you guys.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
thank you, guys.
Have a good week, everyone. Take care.